Okay. So that should be that. So if you remember, last Wednesday we finished with a video, and that video kind of introduced kind of what we're learning about romantic relationships and the dynamics before probably about 1999. The theories of romantic relationships would have been emotional theories. So, and they're still relevant. And I don't want to say they're not. But what we have learned since brain imaging is that the emotional areas, they play a role, but they don't play the pitcher and batter role, as you would say, using a baseball analogy. They're kind of first base, second base, third base, and the outfield. Because what we have found doing brain imaging with people who are truly intimately in love and whatnot is that the emotional areas do activate somewhat, but the major areas that activate are within the brainstem and the paralimbic system. And the brainstem deals with automatic processes such as your heartbeat, digestion systems, hunger, thirst, all of those areas that kind of keep us physiologically alive. And that area becomes very active when you're thinking about a romantic partner or wanting a romantic partner. And what that suggests is that being in love with someone has little less to do with emotion, but is really one of our most basic drives, just like food, thirst, air, and all of those things that are essential to living. The other area of the brain that lights up is in what's called the paralimbic system. It's the area between the limbic system, the lower brain area, and the higher cortical areas. And they're what's called dopaminergic areas, meaning that they are kind of the sensation areas of the brain. They are what gives us rise to motivation. This area, if you want to think about it this way, this area lights up the same way you hit a cocaine or a hit a methamphetamine. This is that. This is comfortable for her. It's nice that no, as a foster kid. This is the area that is lighting up during this time. Okay, so which again suggests that romantic love is a basic drive. And it's one of the main motivation areas, the main area of the brain that really gets us going. And as the presenter last Wednesday suggested, you could liken being in love with someone to addiction in a sense. And so that's kind of where we're at. So let's take a look. And as she also suggested, romantic love goes across species. We see it with most any animals. It's named something a little bit different, but we can see that across species. Okay. When it does come to humans, we find that there's what we call two basic phases of love: limerence and companionate. Limerence really is the phase of the process of falling in love. So, we've been talking about attraction and mate selection, and we need to remember that those are when we're seeking out and seeing a lot of people. We finding that attraction to many individuals, and the process of falling in love, you come to one individual's where they're the figure and everything else fades into the background. And that person really starts to stand out. And in a lot of ways, it is as the presenter from Wednesday said, it is almost like they become the center of everything, is like addiction in a lot of ways. We change perceptions, initiate what we call brooding and obsessive thinking, the need for that to be reciprocated. And so this is one we can't get them off of our mind. We can't stop thinking about who they are, and even when people say the bad things about them, we kind of make those excuses. Well, you don't know him the way I do, or the like. And we see what's called a pendulum swing, where we go through ecstasy in response. So when they text back, depression when there's attention withdrawn. So you text them and they don't text for hours, and you start getting a depressed mode, and feelings of almost sadness and despair, wondering what we did or what you did, for them not to respond to our demands or conversation. And there's anxiety about rejection, and a constant feeling of, oh no, what if this person leaves me or doesn't want me or finds out something about me that they don't like and leaves. Okay. Now, one of the things that is associated with the limerence phase is some neurochemicals. Okay. And the first one, and I can never pronounce it, so I'm just going to call it a type of amphetamine, meaning that our brain starts to produce a natural amphetamine. Amphetamine is like methamphetamine. It's a stimulant. It gets, if you think about someone who's on meth or is on cocaine, they're constantly wanting that next hit, that next something, that something. And it accounts for the exhilaration feeling, sometimes paranoia associated with this stage. And there is actually a smaller set of our population that can actually get addicted to this stage. So once the feelings of the drug wears off, they tend to get out of that relationship and try to jump into another one to get that natural amphetamine high that is naturally produced by the individual. So this is the kind of the amphetamine stage. This period lasts for about 18 months to 3 years, depending on the individual. And according to the person who really studies this this stage, Dr. Susan Fisk, she kind of has associated this with this withdrawal often leads to what's called the 4-year heightened divorce rate. We find that as this period wears off, you're starting to lose that amphetamine, that excitement, that thrill, that that can account for why we have such a high divorce rate within the 4th and 5th year. And again, if we go to a biological or an evolutionary stage, think about, the 4th year, you're getting in the relationship, but there's no really bonding need, because by then, if you had mated with the individual, the child is starting to be more independent and less reliant on the parent. Even though I think most parents would disagree with that, especially moms. But from a biological perspective, that's kind of what it looks like. So this period is really, if you want to think about it, this period is about getting addicted to each other, if you want to use that terminology. Then around 18 months to 3-4 years, we change. We go from phases to what's called companion love. Okay. And this one is more characterized by more emotional intimacy, a deeper attachment, and a deeper affection for the individual. So it's not more, and as this suggests, it's less about the physical, sexual drive in each other, because we see those things and obsession starts to wane. But interdependence increases. This is where we find individuals wanting to be with each other just to be with each other, not for that stimulating feeling and rush. This is when we see couples, if they get through this companion phase after losing that thrill, we start to see a deeper and deeper connection between the two emotionally, and that increases that deep affection for each other. Instead of the sexual interest and obsession, they relish things such as shared meals, joint slumbers, and developing an easygoing acceptance for each other. So you start getting rid of that paranoia that is associated with the limerence phase. Now, what's interesting is we stop producing that amphetamine naturally, and we start to produce actually an opioid. Okay, and if you think about an opioid, it is more it makes you feel more relaxed. It reduces anxiety, and it can even a lot of evidence shows that this is one of the reasons that having a strong, healthy relationship well into elderly years also reduces the pain impact of aging. So these individuals tend to experience less pain than single individuals or people who are in poor relationships. The mistake that we often make in this stage is we mistake contentment and anxiety reduction as a sense of stability. And I want to see if this is, and this is one of the issues of having an actual true long-term relationship is at this point, people start to think of their relationship as a rock, that's what's grounding them, that it's not movable. The problem is that human beings are movable. We're constantly changing. We're constantly evolving. We're constantly interacting with new things and doing things differently. And when individuals get into this contentment phase and reduce that anxiety about losing each other, it's a common thing that divorcees say. They say, "I just woke up one morning and realized I didn't know the person laying next to me. I realized that I don't know who they are, and I've changed so much. I don't want to be in this relationship." So that's a very common thing for people who are in non-toxic. I got to make sure this is non-toxic abusive relationships. This is often the common reason for divorces in the later years. Okay. And probably, if anyone really goes to a couple therapist because they're worried about the disintegration of their relationship or whatnot, usually the first advice that the couple therapists give is to go on a trip, do something new, go on a cruise, start having a different date night. Don't go to the same restaurants. Don't do the same thing, because what the therapist is trying to get the couple to do is to rediscover each other. Because one of the parts of couples therapy is to really see if these people who are in this relationship that thought it was stable can actually get to know each other and fall in love again. Okay. I think there's a quote I often see on Facebook. Being in love with someone for a long time is falling in love with the same person over and over and over. And that's definitely something true, because you do need to continually fall in love with that person, statistically every 5 to 7 years. But anytime there's a big change in the relationship, you definitely need to make a check on that relationship. And probably a really good example of this is postpartum depression. Okay. Because one of the predictors of postpartum depression is the communication style of the partners after the infant is born. So let me take you through the research that looks at this. So in the research they did in a kind of an experimental design, they randomly assigned couples to either just a basic infant care class, how to change diapers, mix formula, breastfeed, all of those kind of infant care things. And then with another group, they did a group on how the two couples' communication style is going to change once there's a infant and a child in their life that is demanding 24/7 of their care, and that the relationship is no longer going to be about just the couple, but it's going to change, and their life, both of them are going to change by this new infant that is dependent upon them, that needs their care, their attention, and therefore their relationship needs to grow and develop with it. Okay. What they found is that for the group that went through the communication style versus what we would call the control group, the learning how to take care of an infant group, is that the group that did the how communication changes, the women, the predictive rate of postpartum depression. Well, I'll just say this: postpartum depression was just 1/8 of what it was in the control group. Okay. And so this is a situation, postpartum depression is much more complicated than this, but this is just one thing that a couple can do to lessen the impact on the relationship and the mother's relationship with the infant, and that emotional state of depression that it can commonly bring. This is one component of it, and it's an example of how the couple needs to change as life changes for them. And if they don't, they often fall into this negative pattern of negativity with the couple. But as this example is, there can even be created emotional responses for the adults, such as postpartum depression. Okay, so this is an example of why we should change over time. Okay. One of the things that I think I mentioned during the Halloween presentation is the issue of romantic jealousy. Okay, and romantic jealousy has two really important components. And I know this sounds strange, because when you think about romantic jealousy, hatred towards the person you're jealous to doesn't quite make sense. But what we have found is that individuals who have romantic jealousy, at that moment they think that person can be with someone else, first comes anger, and then comes hate for the situation, the partner, for the potentiality of losing and all that kind of stuff. And we found that the role of emotion when it comes to romantic jealousy is a function of anger and hate. And as I mentioned during the Halloween conversation, sexual jealousy has been found to be one of the major motives of men murdering women. And we have found this across cultures. There's not a culture that we find where sexual jealousy, especially in men, doesn't lead to potential men murdering women. So jealousy is a huge thing. It is especially present in the limerence stage. But even after that, with relationship maintenance in the compassionate stage, this can be a thing. And probably one of the most important things that needs to be established in this, and a constant conversation that needs to happen, is the boundaries each other expects for each other, and the inclusion of people that come into the person's life. Okay, and I'm going to explain that a little bit more here in just a minute. No, actually, I'm going to explain it right now. Okay, let's talk about healthy versus unhealthy relationships. And when we describe this is kind of how we're going to do this. We're going to do a comparative study. We're going to do a comparative study and observation. So we've done this on a sociological stage, where we just go observe And we can look at this on a psychological stage where we actually measure people's relationship. But what we're going to look at is people who have been married, I believe it was more than 25 years. And we're going to have three groups. We're going to have groups that the couple feel and want and are still completely obsessed with each other. They love each other. They love being around each other. When we do the brain scan, those same areas that initiate romantic love still fire. And so these are people after 25 years who are still in love with each other. And then we're going to have people who, after a certain amount of year, they're together because they tolerate each other. They maybe make good roommates, but the feeling of love has dissipated in that relationship. And then people who didn't make it to 25 years. So that's our three groups. And across studies, there's lots of reasons people on personal and subjective levels stay in love with each other and keep that relationship going. And the list would be enormous for all the different reasons and all the different reasons that people just kind of stay with someone and go, okay, maybe they have a house together, cars together, all of those material things, and it would just be a pain to end that. Okay, there's many reasons that that can happen, but what we have found is three very common themes for individuals who truly are in love after 25 years. And so I want to go through these three common themes. The first theme is emotional security. And the basic definition of emotional security is you can go and tell your partner anything, without fear of ridicule, being laughed at, saying you're what the hell, or worried about that person getting angry, unless you want them to be angry because it was something bad happened to you, but that's another story. That's what emotional security is. Basically, emotional security is the guy or a girl in the office and their coworkers come and they say, hey, I would never tell my girlfriend or my wife about this, but, and then they go and tell them something, or I would never tell my husband or something. Don't let him know this. He would be, this is a person that's sitting at that desk or at the cooler and going, you guys make no sense to me. Why can't you tell your partner that? This is the person in that kind of relationship. Okay. The second thing we find is that they tend to be best friends. And so, I always go back to the Facebook or Instagram meme that says a friend is someone who will bail you out of jail. A best friend is the person sitting in the jail cell with you. And to kind of elaborate on this is kind of what makes these individuals different, and what I would define as best friends is this does not mean that they spend all their time together. This doesn't mean that he doesn't have his friends and she has her friends and they have kind of separate worlds in some ways. But in these relationships, there's no such thing as a girl's night out or a guy's night out that is kept quiet from the other partner. In fact, what makes these individuals unique is they do something within 24 or 48 hours of having a separate event from each other. So the man goes bowling, the female goes out and has drinks with friends, and they have their time with their separate friends and whatnot. But within 24 to 48 hours, they completely relive those events with each other. So the guy might say, yeah, Bill's having trouble with work and Joe is doing this. And the wife might say, yeah, Jill. Ann is having these issues, and and we talked about this. I danced some, and the guy might go, yeah, I bowled a 200, and you should have seen this one shot I did. And they relive those events together. So that's kind of the best friend aspect of it. And then the third one that we have found very common among these individuals is something called role formation. Role formation in its most basic way is, and we'll take a male-female relationship. The male does what he's good at, the female does what she's good at, and what they both do horribly or don't like to do, they do that together. Okay, so maybe she likes doing the dishes, he likes doing the laundry, but they both despise sweeping and cleaning the floors. So they do the sweeping and cleaning the floors together. So they form these roles with each other, and sometimes they're very written in stone, like they verbally agree on it. Other times it's an unwritten thing. And I think a really good example is me and my wife. I'm very introverted, very quiet, shy in a lot of ways. She's extroverted and likes to talk. And so when we go to a social place, she takes on the social role, and I take on the role, I'm going to sit here until I'm asked something. And she keeps the conversations going. She keeps everything active. And I sit and kind of just enjoy, and she notices when I'm anxious. I notice when she's anxious, and then we pull in together to take care of that in social situations. And that's my kind of but it's an unwritten rule between us. We haven't formally said, okay, you're going to do this and I'm going to do that when we go to this function that we're going to go to. It's just something that happens. So those are what we call informal role formations. Okay. Now, when a lot of this research was going on, I want you to keep in mind that these were individuals who were out of our grandparents' generations, a little bit of our parents' generations. And so we're talking to people who were raised in the nuclear family stage of the United States, and where there was this one income person, and one was the guy was considered the king, the breadwinner, and the wife was considered a kind of more of a subservient in some ways, the housekeeper, the stay-at-home, take care of the children. And a lot of the researchers, especially from our sociologists, would say, now, wait a minute, that doesn't seem like a fair and equitable role formation. It seems like one's doing more and one is controlling the other. And these couples would stop the researcher and say, no, wait a minute. The woman would say, I wanted to stay at home. I wanted to take care of the kids and make the home a nice place. And I wanted my man to be the king, as you would say. And the guy would say, yeah, and I wanted to be a king of my home. And I wanted a wife who would be there when I get home and have dinner and all those things. That's role formation. We do see, in the relationships where they were just putting up with each other, or in the relationships where it didn't last 25 years, there was this power dynamic. The woman would say, I just got sick of being, making dinner every night, not feeling appreciated, as an example. Or there might have been some control and power issues with that relationship that led to something more toxic, like violence. Okay. And so I want to make this clear. The role formation is about meeting each other, what we're good at, bad at, wonderful, but also what we want out of a relationship, what role we play. And if the roles are what each person wants, then that is equitable in these relationships. People would maybe not say they're equal, but they're equitable. Okay. And so these are the three things that we tend to find when it comes to these individuals after 25, 30, 40 years who are still in love with each other. And going back to that previous slide, they are the ones who say, yes, this is a person I fall in love with over and over and over. And they keep the relationship rich. They learn about each other. If you noticed in that best friend category, they're continually talking about each other and each other's experiences. And again, on the emotional security level, they don't close each other off. They don't put up barriers to each other. Okay. Now, this doesn't include all relationships in their life, but they find that person that they can have these three things with. So let's talk for a minute about toxic relationships. I want to explain why we use the word toxic. Okay, we use the word toxic because we like to liken toxic relationships to acid burning through metal. Okay, if you look at most acids, when you drip it on a piece of metal, it doesn't instantly burn right through the metal. It gets caustic first, and then it slowly and slowly burns through that metal. This is what a toxic relationship is. I would be willing to bet there are very, very, very few people who on the first date, let's take the guy to girl situation, and the guy goes, you know what? So here's the deal. I'm going to belittle you. I'm going to make fun of you. I'm going to make it sure I limit your access to your family and friends. When you get out of line, I'm going to put you in line. I would be willing to bet we would find very few people who would have the second, third, and fourth date. Okay, because that's not how a toxic relationship is. Toxic relationships start with two individuals who are falling in love with each other, and then slowly one partner, again, I'll use the man to woman example. The guy says, hey, you're gaining a little weight there. And then eventually it's like, gosh, you know what? I don't like you spending time with these certain people. We're not going to go visit your parents anymore. No, you can't have a job. You're going to stay at home. Get out of line. I'm going to put you in line. Stop doing that. And it eventually rolls into this, basically the end result of the toxic relationship is the acid has burned through the metal, and now we have a full domestic violence type of relationship. Okay. And I really like to liken this idea to the Milgram studies. I think I brought these studies up in this class before, but the Milgram studies, it was actually a study that wanted to see if people would be willing to hurt someone up to almost a death amount of shock. Okay, these studies came out of the want to know how people in World War II could torture other people and by the demands of some authority figure and whatnot. But again, just like in a relationship, they didn't go into this relationship thinking that it was going to be abusive, hurtful, shocking, and all that thing. They went into the relationship thinking that they were going to do research on learning behavior. And basically what it is you had a learner in one room and a teacher in the other. The teacher is always going to be the participant. The learner is a Confederate who never really actually received any shocks or anything like that. But basically what's going to happen is is the person is going to give some analogies, those kinds of things. If the learner gets it right, they go on to the next question. If the learner gets it wrong, the participant does a little shock on a shock box. Okay. And the shock box started at 45 volts. And then every volt after that increased by 15 volts. So it'd go 45, what's 45 plus 50, 60, and so on up to 450 volts. And at 450 volts, it had triple X may cause death. Okay. Now, I know I probably have some electricians in the room that know that voltage and amps, that kind of works different than that, but that's kind of the mindset that they put into these individuals. And so you start at 15 volts. And after each progressive volt, the person starts to scream and yell and protest, and the person says, no, continue. There's an authority figure of some type saying, no, continue, those kinds of things. And the question is how many people would go to 450 volts? Well, when Milgram's originally set up this experiment, he set it right at 450 volts, saying if the participant gets it wrong, just shock them with the full 150 volts. No one did it. No one did it. But when you start with 15 volts, 2/3, 68% of people will go clear all the way up to 450 volts. In fact, what they found is once individuals got up to about 150 volts, 100% of people went all the way to 450 volts. And the replications that have been done since then, there was one in 2010, 2016, 2018, find these same relationships, albeit they do it a lot more ethically today. But we don't need to get into that at this moment. So this is the point. Evil always starts at 15 volts. And then it slowly progresses until someone gets to that 450 volt point, which we would define as that full-blown domestic violent type of relationship. And so the key to understanding a toxic relationship is understanding when those switches are starting to be switched. And when it gets to that 150 volts, know that if that continues, it's not going to stop. Okay. And that's kind of what we have found with toxic relationships. And so, and again, I am going to say this, toxic relationships are not always one way. It's not always a man towards a woman or a woman towards a man. There can be two people who are completely awful with each other. Okay. And so I don't want to make the assumption, and this is why it's called toxic relationships and not necessarily the development of domestic relationships or domestic violence relationships, but two people can be so awful with each other that they do end up severely hurting with each other, if not committing a murder-suicide of some type. So this is a thing that I want to express at this point is there are people who are just really bad for each other. And the key is trying to get to how those switches are being switched every time. Okay. And so let's switch from that to divorce and separation. Okay. We know that the shift towards divorce and the increase in divorce is the shift from seeing women as purely just property to more human rights and equal treatment of women. And this has allowed our society to recognize that one does not need to stay in a relationship if it's harmful. For a good portion of American history, there's a reason why it was called a marriage license. It wasn't called a marriage certificate because you were basically taking possession of your now female partner. In fact, during much of our history, when you went down to get your marriage license, you didn't do it You didn't get it from the local magistrate or family court system. You actually went to the same place that you would say get your driver's license or license your car or license an animal. Okay. But when the women's suffrage movement happened, when we started needing dual income homes and women were seen as valuable parts of the economy during World War I and World War II, and we continued this thing about the drive to recognize that women have an equal place to men in society. This then allowed women to recognize that they don't need to stay with their partner. Now, and so that's kind of that historical point, and we've talked about some of the ways that a relationship ends. We have the toxic relationship pathway. We have the not staying connected and continually staying in love with the person that is constantly changing in front of us. We looked at it from the biological perspective and looking at that 4-year increase due to the loss of limerence and going into companion relationships. And so those tend to be some of the underlying reasons that lead to divorce. There's definitely many other reasons that are more what we call idiosyncratic or to the couple, but those tend to be very common driving forces for divorce. And many have asked, research on the effects of divorce on children. It's really kind of mixed, and it varies greatly depending on the source that you're getting the information from. So if you look at, pro marriage, pro family groups that say, you keep the marriage together no matter what, they tend to find findings that it has a detrimental effect on children. And then if you look at the other side, they tend to promote this idea that no, children are just fine in a single family home. But what we have found is some commonalities that we can look at when it comes to maintaining a healthy home after divorce. Okay, and the first thing that we have found is the parents, now that they're co-parenting, needs to manage their own anger towards each other. We commonly see children who tend to have suffer through divorce, and it's a really hard thing. The child is used as a pawn back and forth to kind of get back at the other partner, or get those things, or express their anger through their children through going back and forth. The other part of it is if it's an end of a domestic violence relationship, making sure both homes are safe for the child, making sure dad isn't using abusive and power control techniques. If it's, I'm using this dad to mother, but there are mother to dad, and I'm just using this as an example. Dad doesn't continue to use those abusive techniques to try and maintain power and control, such as dragging the spouse constantly through court. And on the other side, the female making sure that the victim, and I should use offender victim, and the victim making sure they don't allow more toxic individuals into the relationship and those kinds of things. And it's a tight ground, and making sure that both couples, because it is a domestic violence, a very toxic environment, making sure that, all the court-ordered counseling is completed and all those kinds of things. So, and we do find that couples who do go through those processes and set those boundaries, even if it's from a domestic violence situation, it could eventually evolve into a healthy co-parenting situation, but it takes a lot of work when it comes out of a toxic or domestic violence type of relationship, because there needs to be healing on both sides. And then we also find that children tend to have less difficulties when the parents maintain communication with each other about the child's welfare, and they maintain a healthy sense of this is the little Billy's playing soccer, and allowing both parents to go to the soccer games, and those kinds of things tend to lessen the impact of divorce on children. And probably the thing that we often talk about in human development, especially if it's a young child between the age of 3 and 6, making sure that the children have those healthy role models, not only same sex but opposite sex role models in the child's life, and both parents from there on modeling what healthy parents should be doing, but in their own separate relationships, modeling what those relationships should look like. So those tend to be the common things we find. But as I mentioned, the difficult about distangling this is that the research on children is very, very mixed about whether it's detrimental or if it's healthy for children. And again, it depends on the source. And I think on the type of relationship the two are getting out of, whether it's been a toxic relationship or a violent relationship, that tends to have a huge impact on outcomes as well. But that's kind of where it is that we know about. So once we go beyond intimate relationships, we do need to understand that we do have to have relationships outside of that. We have to keep connections with friends, family, community, and culture. And we need to understand what social connection predicts and why it is important. And I'll just bring this up. The highest suicide rates that we tend to find are males between the age of 50 and 65. Because men, when they start to, they often have defined themselves based on their career and their work life and their work friendships. And that tends to be a major part of what they identify with. When you think about 50 to 65, you're starting to go into the retirement area. And men do a very poor job of maintaining those friendships after they retire. They tend to don't maintain their identity from their work and those kinds of things. And this is what makes men different than what we see with women. Is women, even when they're going through their retirement years, will maintain relationships with coworkers, with family members, with community members. And that tends to be the biggest predictor of this period of time between men and women, and the suicide rate that we see with men between the age of 50 to 65. And so in our later years, we see that social connections and friendships and sense of community are important. And we can even see this even in early childhood and going into adolescence. The less socially connected your elementary child is, I'm not going to say yours an elementary child is, the less friendships they try to maintain, the less integrated they are into their school community and their, if they have a religious community and family community, the more and more disconnected this is. This actually is one of the best predictors of adolescent suicide. And we find that, adolescents who don't maintain this is one of the better predictors of suicide in the early adult years of life. And so, this lecture has heavily focused on romantic relationships, and it is true they're very important. There's what keeps our species going, if you want to think of it that way. It's one of our most basic drives, but we also see this need to maintain other social connections, if not but as important as maintaining healthy romantic relationships. And that's kind of the state of affairs that we have. Okay, so I'm going to stop here because this is going to be our topic for Wednesday, not Thursday, Wednesday. So I'm going to stop sharing right here. Let me get rid of this. I'm going to stop our recording.